It's a pleasure to be speaking to you this afternoon about practical sandboxing on the Windows platform. And this is essentially an assessment of the kinds of security benefits we can get from the sandboxes used by Protected Mode Internet Explorer, Adobe Reader X, and also Google Chrome and the Chromium project. So if I can just introduce myself, my name is Tom Keetch. I work for Verizon Business's Threat and Vulnerability Practice, and I'm the lead consultant for code review within the EMEA region. So I've been presenting on this and kind of similar topics for a little while now. It started when I wanted to look at protected mode IE and try and answer the question, well, how much safer is this making me? What additional protection is this really giving me? And from what was publicly available from Microsoft, it was kind of unclear. So then I kind of expanded my remit to looking at practical sandboxing more generally and incorporating these different sandboxes. So this is going to be an attack-focused presentation. Other previous presentations have maybe been, so the OS one was maybe more defense-centric, and each presentation has got a different focus, so I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to go back and look at some of the previous white papers and so on. And why am I speaking about this topic? Well, exploit mitigations are, to me, extremely interesting. They're my favourite topic, and it's basically trying to answer the question, how do we make finding and exploiting vulnerabilities prohibitively expensive for attackers? We want to dissuade them from attacking, products that we design. We want to dissuade them from attacking other consumers or particular customers and make them go after harder targets. So so I want to give you a very brief introduction to what practical sandboxing is. I won't go too deep into the mechanisms behind it, but if you're interested, there's a lot of further reading and a lot of other people that have presented on that topic. So what is practical sandboxing? So it's a way in which applications can create their own customized sandboxes for their applications using entirely user mode components. So if you take a kind of a generic sandbox like Sandboxy, that's typically using kernel drivers. Now we don't want to have to ship kernel drivers with our browsers or with our PDF renderers, not least because if there's a minor bug in our sandbox implementation, it's going to take the whole system down. And so practical sandbox is a methodology, a collection of techniques that can be brought together to provide a reasonably secure user mode sandbox. And so it's based entirely on facilities provided by the Windows operating system. This is going to focus on three main consumers of this methodology. So Protected Mode IE, which has got a very limited implementation, and Adobe Reader X and Chromium that have got more complete implementations. There are some others, like the Microsoft Office isolated conversion environment, and there might be some other consumers that I'm not aware of, but I don't go into detail on those. So really what this presentation about is not only what are these sandboxes, but how can we escape from these sandboxes with a minimum amount of effort. I'm not a vulnerability researcher. I was looking at this from maybe a higher level and trying to find vectors and simple exploits that I could use to escape the sandbox. So the presentation will be structured like this. So I want to begin by kind of giving a framework to work within to try and give a context to the kinds of issues that I found and try and explain why these are important. Then give you a brief background on the practical sandboxing implementations themselves. There's going to be a number of the practical content is a number of vectors and exploits that can be used to escape these sandboxes today, and all of these are still valid. And I think every presentation should have maybe an argumentative part, and so that I'm going to be kind of deconstructing Adobe's own view of the sandbox as an exploit mitigation and saying, well, maybe they're being a little too charitable about how effective this really is. and then hopefully you can draw some conclusions that not only apply to sandboxes but to exploit mitigation in general, which is, I think, is becoming a more and more important topic. So, sandboxes for exploit mitigation. Why would we use a sandbox for exploit mitigation? So, when trying to mitigate against a particular exploit or a class of exploits, we've got two main options for designing that. So either we can look to increase the cost of exploitation, and this is done very effectively by combining DEP and ASLR. As we've seen with Peter's presentation earlier on Mona, this is essentially an arms race, because each time these new mitigations come up, ways come about of bypassing them, and as attackers mature, they can bypass these more and more easily. But they still serve us well, because they force attackers to focus on less generic exploitation techniques. And yeah, so typically exploits have to use a kind of application-specific exploitation technique, such as, for example, JIT spraying. So sandboxes work as an exploit mitigation by reducing the value of compromising a target to an attacker. So by placing a process inside a more restrictive environment without access to privileged resources, we make it a less enticing target. But none of these exploit mitigations are perfect. Normally the sandboxes themselves have implementation flaws or ways in which they can be bypassed. So we assume that any sandbox can be bypassed for some finite cost. That might be very high or very low, depending on how good the implementation is. And this presentation is a focus on the sandbox escape part of that. So once you've got our malicious code running inside a sandbox process, how can we escape that sandbox? It's far too much to squeeze into just an hour, so I'm more than happy to take questions either at the end, or you can contact me over Twitter or email. So I want to introduce a concept of return on exploitation. So whenever someone wants to attack a system, ultimately, if they're financially motivated, they're looking to gain something of some value to them, and that value would depend on the attacker. And there's also kind of an expected cost to developing and deploying an exploit. So when we want to escape a sandbox, typically we've got a two-step attack process with potentially two separate exploits and kind of two separate I guess payoffs. So there's the cost of the initial exploit. So that would be a typical remote exploit that will get you code execution, and then there's the cost of developing the exploit that escapes the sandbox. And so one of the things I've focused on here is trying to find the cheapest way to escape the sandbox. And also, so an attack is only really viable if the expected payoff, which is a two-step, is greater than the expected cost of developing that exploit. So in terms of exploit mitigations, there are two ways in which this can kind of fail. Firstly, we can bypass exploit mitigation, and that's going to have some variable costs associated with it. But if the exploit mitigation is trivial to bypass, we just have to modify our attack slightly, and it will work just as it did before, and so it won't be dissuading any of our attackers. Or it could be that what we're trying to protect has such a high value that these kinds of exploit mitigations aren't really effective, because although they're making it harder, they're not dissuading attackers from going after these systems necessarily. Or the second failing, which is more relevant to sandboxes, is that it doesn't reduce the value of a remote code execution bug for a particular application. So either the sandbox is protecting the wrong assets, or they're assets that actually just can't be protected by a sandbox. So depending on the type of application, it might be that a sandbox is completely pointless. So there's four cases. So case A is what I would call kind of a safe system. So this might be that it's extremely secure, or it just doesn't have a very high value to an attacker, and the expected cost of developing and deploying an attack is always higher than the expected payoff from successful exploitation. Likewise, B is an unsafe system. It's always going to be, there isn't really adequate exploit mitigation in place, and so the payoff is always positive for an attacker. Cases C and D are the two failure modes that I talked about on the previous slide. So case C is where it's an exploit mitigation that's trivial to bypass, and case D is where you've got an extremely strong sandbox, but you may be protecting the wrong thing. So even without bypassing the sandbox, you're still gaining access to all the resources that are actually your objective. Okay, so this was focusing on looking on cheap exploits, and I hope that's kind of framed the argument to show why this is important. So as a result, I found a number of kind of exploits and vectors. These kind of fell into 3 or 4 categories. So the first was previously unexposed interfaces. By introducing a new security boundary within an existing system, actually you might be exposing new interfaces that weren't previously subject to having malicious inputs sent to them. Also, there are particular easily detectable and exploitable conditions that might easily allow sandbox escape. But actually, most of the bugs are due to incomplete implementations. So various implementations didn't implement the entire practical sandboxing methodology, and as a result, they're vulnerable to specific classes of issues. And there are also some sandbox-specific issues which relate to the particular sandboxing architecture or design that's in place. There are also a number of resources which aren't protected by practical sandboxing. So network access is unrestricted, so you could go on to attack other hosts on the network. Anything, in the case of browsers, anything that's protected by the same origin policy isn't going to be protected, so you can steal someone's cookies and so on. And also, any bugs in kernel interfaces are still exploitable to escape the sandbox. Okay, so it's an overview of how these sandboxes are implemented. So the practical sandboxing methodology brings together kind of, depending how you measure it, 3, 4, 6 different mechanisms. So the main one is the use of restricted access tokens. So every process, every thread has got kind of a set of permissions, a set of access rights associated with it, and maybe a set of group memberships. So the first way that we can limit what a process or a thread can do is to remove group membership SIDs from its token. So you might do this by removing the administrator SID and say you can only use this SID for denying access to a resource, not for permitting access to a resource. Sorry. And so that covers discretionary access control. We want to remove all of the rights associated with the process. And we can also mark something as being low integrity on Vista and later. So low integrity says this process is less trustworthy than a normal user process. And actually integrity levels enforce various checks throughout the system that kind of overlaps with a lot of these other mechanisms. So the use of mandatory integrity control or integrity levels isn't kind of isn't a necessary part of this methodology, but it's mainly used for defense in depth. We can also strip particular capabilities from a token, so remove the right to impersonate other users. So there's a completely separate set of separate access control mechanism associated with the GUI subsystem. So there's the concepts of Windows stations and desktops, and any application on the same desktop are essentially in the same security compartment. So we have to implement Windows station isolation and desktop isolation, and unfortunately I don't have time to go too much into detail about those. And lastly, we can use job object restrictions. So job objects are used to manage groups of processes as a single unit, and there are actually additional restrictions that can be applied through job objects that are a necessary part of practical sandboxing. So they seem to be having a better time than we are. So each of these mitigates against a different attack, and actually by looking at the different sandboxes and figuring out what they do and don't implement, we can determine different attack strategies for the different sandboxes. So Protected Mode IE was the very first implementation, and it chooses to run to render sites in lesser trusted IE zones at low integrity. And low integrity is the main way that it segregates things from the rest of the system. Otherwise, they share in the same session, WinStation desktop, and of course, any websites which are in more trusted zones aren't sandboxed. So if we look at this kind of as a checklist, so really they implement low integrity and some basic privilege stripping, but they're mostly kind of overlapping mechanisms anyway. So this is a very, very limited implementation. As a result of using integrity levels, so this sandbox only works on Vista and later. It only protects the integrity of the system, so preventing the modification of files, and it doesn't protect the confidentiality. So as a kind of a simple failure of this sandbox is that a compromised IE process can read all of a user's files and send them back to their remote server, because network access isn't restricted. And they've got full access to things like the clipboard and also the global atom table, which is a primitive form of IPC, and that actually exposes other applications to certain types of attacks through this interface. So I presented this research at Hacked@LU, and this was kind of my first kind of foray into kind of talking to other people about this research. And I presented a number of different ways in which you can escape from the sandbox, including through UAC launches, what I call trusted broker attacks, and I also presented a generic Protected Mode IE bypass that works on domain-joined workstations, and this, as far as I can tell, will not be fixed by Microsoft. Yeah, so they're saying this isn't a security boundary, so we're not necessarily going to fix any of these sandbox escapes. And just the sheer number of potential elevation routes means that actually they can't make any guarantees about how much safer you are with Protected Mode IE. Adobe Reader X implemented a much stronger sandbox. So they started using restricted tokens that didn't just use low integrity, and they started applying job object restrictions. But for various kind of reasons related to this legacy application, they couldn't implement Windows Station isolation or desktop isolation, and this brings about the possibility of various UI spoofing attacks. But there are also some other weaknesses. Yes, if we look at this as a checklist, they're applying almost entirely a fully restricted token, apart from one minor caveat, which actually results in a bypass. Yeah, and they're applying some, but not all, of these job object restrictions. So it's actually making use of Google Chrome's own sandbox, because it's using the same framework, because it's BSD licensed, and this framework provides it with does all the heavy lifting of locking down processes, and also doing inter-process communication between the sandbox process and other more trusted components. So it's only the PDF renderer that's actually being sandboxed, because that's the highest risk component. And through IPC it speaks to the broker, and the broker can perform I guess any more privileged operations on behalf of the renderer, but applying a policy that still doesn't allow code to escape from the sandbox. So we're trying to keep the renderer functional, but while still limiting the impact of any compromise. The main limitations are, firstly, that the broker doesn't restrict read access, so similar to the problem we saw with Protected Mode IE. So again, you can read all of the user's files, pipe them off to your remote server. Again, not protecting the clipboard, not protecting the global atom table. The most interesting limitation, and it won't be clear to you why, but the restricted token includes a entity authority restricted SID, and this permits a type of attack I call base named objects namespace squatting. And because it's not implementing Windows Station on desktop isolation, there are certain attacks that are possible, but they're actually compensating with a number of kind of overlapping job object restrictions that do the same thing. If you're interested about kind of those limitations, then I recommend the Adobe Asset Team blog post on the topic. But obviously, take what they say, but a pinch of salt. So Chromium actually introduced a far more compartmentalized architecture. So each browser component is in its own individual sandbox. Now, if we look at the renderer sandbox, which contains WebKit, and as you know, that had a large number of remote code execution vulnerabilities in it, that's actually running in a very restricted sandbox. But then each different plugin can run in a different sandbox. So if we just look at the renderer, then actually we're seeing they're implementing the full practical sandboxing methodology. So they can't limit network access, and they can't prevent local kernel exploitation, but otherwise they're protecting themselves against everything that they can using this methodology. Yes, so they're using this framework which they've made available to other vendors, and that allows them to apply the full methodology. The renderer, and this is important, that is in the most restrictive possible sandbox. So any escapes from that would be either due to an implementation fault in the broker or various things that they can't protect against. Third-party plugins are often just not sandboxed at all, so like Shockwave Java, they all run fully unrestricted. So all of your Shockwave exploits still apply. And this was a source of confusion for maybe a famous French grey/black hat organisation called Vupen. Adobe Flash has got a very, very limited sandbox. And also the GPU process just isn't sandboxed at all. And that's what kind of regulates how renderers communicate with like 3D graphics acceleration.